Hi, folks. Steven here. I'm on the phone with Anne from Pikapi Podcast, and this is another in our Pokemon music discussion series. So this time around, we're going to be talking about the music of Mewtwo Strikes Back Evolution. Of course, this is the CGI remake of Pokemon the first movie, Mewtwo Strikes Back, that recently came out on Netflix about a week or so before we recorded this. And we're going to be talking about the music that's in the movie. It'd be kind of interesting. I think we're also going to spend a fair bit of time talking about music that's not in the movie, which is kind of a thing, but I guess being a remake, that's something we have to cover. And we'll also be talking a little bit about the movie itself in a bonus segment that you'll hear after all of this. And we should probably start out, since this is a remake, we should talk about how each of us experienced the original version of the movie. Why don't you go ahead first? How did you experience this movie first time around, the original version?
Well, way back in the day, I was babysitting for some family friends, and the kids wanted to watch the movie. I was kind of on the fence about Pokemon at the time. Like, I was not as super into it. But they started watching the movie, and I got really engrossed. And so after they went to bed, I stayed up and finished the movie and was just very charmed by a lot of the things in it that were kind of different than some of the other media I'd been consuming up to that point. It really spoke to me on a deep level that has continued to this day. And you?
So, in other words, you were listening, so in other words, you were watching it on like VHS or DVD or something like that in early 2000. Is that
DVD.
right then?
So yes, DVD. So I was a little behind. I can't remember exactly how much because I did not see it in theaters. This show had been airing for quite some time without me really being like, I was aware of it, but I wasn't watching very many episodes of it. But I think it was before the second movie had aired in theaters here in the US. So I was a little late to the party, but not that late.
What was kind of your take, your opinion, quality wise on the movie when you first saw it?
At that time, I wasn't really like focused on quality of visuals and the like, and like cinematography and movie making. But I was very wrapped up in the story and the character relations, especially. Like, there were so many little character moments between Ash and Pikachu, Ash and Charizard, Mewtwo and his search for meaning in life, which was something that as a young teenager was very important to me. Like, I was asking all those questions of who am I? Why am I here? So I was just very struck by the deep feeling that was packed into a story that didn't seem to necessarily be about all those things. The actual movie making, I don't think I was conscious of thinking of it in that way, but in terms of just storytelling, I was very impressed.
So, despite what some of you in the audience may think, I actually had a somewhat different opinion of this movie when I originally saw it. So, back in 1999, I did see this in theaters when I was in high school. And I had been following the TV show. I guess I was one of those weird high school kids who actually got up early enough to watch Saturday morning cartoons. And, I kind of had take it or leave it is not the right word to refer to the TV show, but I kind of enjoyed it. But I think my enjoyment of the TV series increased dramatically once the To Be a Master album came out for some reason. I think I was able to connect more musically to it. But as far as the movie, I knew a few things going in plot-wise about it from stuff I had read online. And I went in there and, to kind of be honest, I really didn't like it all that much after I came out. I think I felt it laid, or it put the anti-war message in there. It lingered on that a little too much. And I actually came out of it. The thought I remember having is that, oh, geez, this is, I think this is worse than the Mario movie that came out a few years earlier. And despite that, I did get it on DVD the day it came out. If I remember correctly, it actually came out in the US on DVD and VHS the same day as the NSYNC album No Strings Attached. So my mom had to buy that for my sister and the DVD for me. And over time, partially from reading fan reactions and stuff like that, my opinion of the original movie has actually improved. I tend to refer to it. You've heard the term good bad movie. That's not how I see the first movie. I see it as sort of a good and bad first, or a good and bad movie. And what I mean by that is it has some parts that are extremely well done, and but it also has some rough edges, some of which I would say, and we'll talk about this more later, I think date back to the original Japanese version. And, I can kind of see why critics were not terribly pleased and why there's a contingent of folks on the internet that are like, you really need to see the original Japanese version with subtitles and whatnot. Excuse me. But my opinion of this dub, I think I've always liked it to a certain extent musically, but it has definitely improved as time's gone on. But yeah, that was sort of how I experienced the first movie. And I'm sure a lot of folks have different ways. I'm sure a lot of folks who are going to hear this saw it in theaters when it came out, and things of that nature. I guess I should ask Anne, have you actually watched the original version, like in Japanese with English subtitles? I know there's not really technically a way to do that, but
well, I mean, you can buy the DVD. Well, no, it wouldn't have you. It doesn't have English subtitles though. The Japanese DVD. Yeah, I have watched it in Japanese multiple times. And I speak Japanese decently enough to watch a Pokemon movie. I have opinions about it. I definitely think if you have the chance and you are invested in Pokemon and Pokemon storytelling, it is worth to see it at least once. Just because there are some subtleties and nuances that I feel and people I've watched it with feel kind of just change how you see that story, and make some things make a little bit more emotional sense. But I mean, it's not the world's worst translation, despite what people may be telling you. It's actually not that much of a departure. There's just that one scene with Mew, man, that I have feelings about.
yeah, we'll definitely bring that up a little bit later, because of how this remake does handle that in a certain way. But yeah, that's sort of our experience with the original version of the movie. I did, of course, get the soundtrack CD for the English version, both the pop soundtrack, which was very commercially successful, and despite that is really only available in physical form, and the score album for the original for the English version. I do also have the score album for the Japanese version. I picked that up a few years ago. But that's sort of our history with that. What about this remake? I assume most of us saw it on Netflix. I did make it a personal effort. I did watch it twice on there. I watched it once in English and once in Japanese with English subtitles, which are not, as we'll talk about later, perhaps not totally directly tied to the original Japanese version, but certainly kind of closer to it. And what was sort of your methodology for viewing this remake?
I got to watch it on Netflix. I didn't have a ton of time to devote to it, so I watched half of it in English and half of it in Japanese. I would say those subtitles are English closed captioning, so they have nothing to do with the Japanese dialogue. Like I said, the original translation is not that far off. So until you get to some of those meteor scenes toward the end, especially that one with Mewtwo facing off against Mew, I don't think it matters much. But once you get to that point, I could definitely hear oh yeah, these subtitles are all about the English closed captioning. They are not translating what is actually happening on screen. But yeah, for the first half, they were pretty darn on point.
All right. Well, the actual musical portions of this, what we usually wind up talking about are really kind of three things. We focus mainly on the ends themes, primarily just because the opening themes are usually somehow derived from what's ever happening in the TV show for that season. They're usually some version of the TV show theme song for that area for that season. So we end up talking a fair bit about the end themes. We also usually do talk about the intro theme song, especially if it's been significantly rearranged or transformed from the TV version. And we also usually talk about the score. So that's sort of the trifecta here. These, if you have seen our other, or if you've listened to our other discussions, this is going to be a little bit structurally different, in part because there's a lot of repeated content, but also some differences and stuff that we're going to have to go over. But as far as this remake, the ending theme song on the Japanese side, we have a remade version of "Together with the Wind," which obviously was also the same-ish song. There are some interesting differences on the Japanese side with let's see, Kobayashi Sachiko and Shoko Nakagawa sort of collaborating on this remake. And then on the English side, what we have is a totally new song called Keep Evolving. I think lead vocals on that are done by Haven Pashal, and also some stuff from, let's see, Charity Gooden and a name that escapes me who did the like the stuff from the XYN themes. It's all people that kind of, I guess, somewhat inconveniently / conveniently for this discussion, we've talked about before in previous discussions when they've done songs there. So it's a little bit odd in that regard. But Anne, why don't you give folks at home, we're going to talk about the Japanese one first as far as its production. Anne, why don't you give us a little refresher on who Kobayashi Sachiko and Shoko Nakagawa are?
So Kobayashi Sachiko, she is a enka singer in Japan, and enka is kind of a old-fashioned style of Japanese music. It's a very blue collar in the way we would view country music over here, I think. It's kind of it's an acquired taste for those of us who are Western and not used to that style of music. There's a lot of pitch modulation involved in the best enka singers, and she is able to apply some of that enka quality to her performance in this song. She's been involved with Pokemon in a lot of ways. She was part of the trio Suzuki-kan, and kind of helping out a lot of Pokemon musical and voiceover work in the early days. She does the voice of Voyager or Miranda as well in this movie. And then Shoko Nakagawa was kind of a kid when Pokemon came out. She's a model who specializes in cosplay. She's a talent, an idol in Japan. And she's one of the things she's really known for is her diehard love of anime and Pokemon in specific. And she has been kind of the face of Pokemon promo in Japan for a while. She's been involved in almost every movie for the past at least decade. And she is also on this track, and I think it's just a lovely blend of old and new to bring this movie together. Like that's a nice touch. That's clever.
Yeah, Shoko's done a couple songs for Pokemon over the years as well, and like you mentioned, that Kobayashi has that connection to Suzuki-san. The other members, by the way, are Imakuni, who we talked about a fair bit during our last discussion card game for Game Boy, since he's a non-player character or in that game that you can encounter as kind of an oddball character, is someone with more of an English background who also speaks Japanese. And actually, if you listen to the Japanese audio track, he's the guy who voices the pirate during that appears during the opening sequence. But in any event, that you did tell me earlier, there appears to be a new arranger, new version. Who is that? Do you know anything about that person?
Yes. Let me pull up my notes here real quick. Yeah, so our new arranger for the Kazai Toisho ni movie 22 edition is Seiji Kameda. I wasn't able to find out a ton of background on him, but yeah, he was working with composer Hirokazu Tanaka, who did the original composition for Kaze Toishoni. The original arranger was Ryo Sawada, so a little bit of a change there in personnel, but otherwise it's 90% the same people on this track, and yet it sounds very different.
Yeah, we'll definitely go into some of the musical differences when we start talking about the actual song. We usually wind up actually ping-ponging back and forth a little bit, but in any event, let's head back over to the English side. As far as production on this, one of the folks in our chat room was very nice and let me know that the other person who does vocals on this is Danny Marcus, who most of you will know did the ending theme songs for all of the XY movies, the Diancie movie, the Hoopa movie, and the Magirna movies. We talked about all of those, I believe, last year. So those should actually all be in the podcast if you want to know more about that. I guess Ben Dixon did some stuff in there as well for Keep Evolving. And it was written by Ed Goldfarb, the usual folks there. So all folks we've discussed before, I did briefly consider like finding one of the backup people and doing like a deep dive on that. But since these folks were all already in the orbit of Pokemon music already, it's pretty easy to see why they would get involved on a project like this. It just kind of all makes sense. And obviously, the song was written for this movie, unlike a certain other song that we will probably bring up as a comparison point at some point in this discussion. But really don't have, unfortunately, a ton to say there. I do know from reading some like YouTube comments and whatnot that apparently this song was localized to other languages, which is something that wasn't always done with the first couple movies, but has become, I think, more common. Sometimes you get the English version in other territories for the ending theme song or even the opening. But in this case, it seems like this ending song was localized to other languages, which is, I guess, kind of a neat touch there.
I'd love to hear some of those. I got to look those up. That sounds wonderful.
Yeah, I haven't seen those. Nothing on YouTube has directed me to those, at least. Nothing has suggested them. Some of them are probably out there, but if you do want to hear the song outside the movie, there are kind of ways you can do that. But kind of unfortunately, that's about all I can really say production-wise, since there aren't that many new people. But if you want to know more about them, just go back to the discussion of the X and Y and the other, I guess you could say, reboot continuity timeline movies that we've talked about, and you'll get a pretty good idea of who Ed Goldfarb and Charity Gooden, Haven Pashal, by the way, is also, and Danny Marcus, I believe, both done voice acting. Haven is best known for being the voice of Serena in the XY generation, and has done a number of other Pokemon voices over time. So that's where all those folks come from. So, like I said, not a surprise that they're involved in this movie, although nothing against them. I do kind of hope that going forward that we start getting some other voices in there. I do kind of like getting new folks every once in a while, regardless of how good the other folks, the folks doing the last couple movies are. It's always, to me, nice to have some variety in there. But going back to the Japanese side, let's talk about this new version of Together with the Wind, or Kaze to Isho ni, and sort of how, as you mentioned, it is somewhat different. Lyrically, it seems to be very similar, has a lot of the same underlying melody and stuff like that. But definitely would say the tone of the production is rather different. If I remember correctly, I re-listened to both the original version and the new version yesterday. That I think the original version was more designed to sound like it was being performed like on a stage with a large orchestra right in there and whatnot. I don't know how much that was actually the case, but it had a more open feel. And this one seems much more like a studio production. Would you say that's a fair assessment, Anne?
I would, yeah. Like, there's definitely, like, the first one, it builds with like that, like, very sparse instrumentation, and then just the child's voice, and then it slowly grew. More instruments came in, things swelled, like the children's choir came in at the end. it did have that feel of a stage presentation and very, like as you said, open, whereas this, a very different feel. And I would say, like, the original track opened very melancholy as well, which I liked a lot. This one opens with a instrumental riff that's feels much more soothing and positive. Like, I almost wasn't sure I was actually listening to Kaze Toishini until the words came in, because the opening was such a very different musical feel.
Yeah, I kind of agree with a little bit of that. I was pretty much locked straight on to the Kaze Toishuni as the. I'm not sure if that's quite the best phraseology to use there or whatever, but I think you get what I mean. There is it very much struck me as that song, so I didn't have quite that experience with it. The instrumentation, as you might guess from that, it would follow a little bit in sort of a similar pattern. I think there's the piano is more prominent in this one than it was in the original version, and the strings are a little bit. And there is sort of an orchestral presence there, but it's not nearly as big there.
And a bit more balanced throughout, I think. Like, not just starting sparse and growing to the end. It's a bit more balanced in the beginnings and middle, I believe. Maybe.
Although I suspect some of that might just be the way audio is mastered nowadays with less dynamic range, but I don't know.
Could be, yeah.
But I let's see some other things. Let's see, what was I about to ask next? Give me a second here.
Well, while you're looking, like, one of the things that kind of struck me was, in the original version, the child sings, its opening part, and then it and the kids choir kind of join at the end. Here, there were a lot of interesting moments where Shoko and Kobayashi kind of like came together and blended in middle parts of the song on particular lines that kind of just made them have that little extra pop and a little bit extra emotional meaning. I'm not sure I'm in love with this arrangement as a whole, but like there were a lot of little touches like that I found very sweet.
Yeah, I did listen to this a few times since my Japanese is just virtually non-existent. I know a few phrases here and there. I'm sure I did not pick up on. I don't recall picking up on stuff like that, but I did want to talk a little bit about the lyrics, since I assume they're mostly unchanged from the original version, if not completely unchanged. But what is this song talking about?
So this song is talking about kind of a person leaving home and going on a long journey, and kind of the various feelings that they experience along the way, having encounters and partings, and just the sense of like, how long is this journey going to go on? And I kind of mentioned, like, the original version starts out a little bit melancholy, where it kind of like starts out like, oh my gosh, how long are you going to continue to walk? Like, how long is this going to go? And then at the end, it's like almost more of a joyous, like, how long is this going to go? Like, we're going to step on the great earth and go anywhere. So it's kind of just you can take it off as Ash's Pokemon journey, but also like the journey of life. It's like life has a lot of ups and downs, and you leave where you started and you come back and things are different, and you have to say goodbye to your past and move forward. There's a lot of those imageries and feelings in it.
Yeah, one thing we had definitely observed when we talked about this song originally back in 2016, that it definitely captures a lot of aspects of Pokemon, the franchise and the series and stuff like that, but not so much the movie itself. And I think you and I still feel that way about it, right, Anne?
Yeah, recently I've kind of come around to, like, you could take it as a metaphor for Mewtwo's journey, because he kind of starts off the movie in that same place of like, who am I? Where am I? What is this? How long am I going to have to continue to walk this uncertain path? And by the end of the movie, kind of has an appreciation for life and the potential and hope that is given to all living things, regardless of how they were born. but again, it's a metaphorical connection. There's not a lot of literal tie-ins to the events of the movie.
Okay, well, there is one thing with the new version I kind of wanted to run by you in regards to sort of the movie and its characters. So in this new version, we have two lead singers, Kobayashi and Shoko, and we have sort of the child. I think it is a different recording. They didn't just obviously they couldn't use the same kid from 20 years ago. That would be a bit odd.
It's like them as a middle-aged adult now.
Yeah, probably wouldn't work so great. But
then again, Shoko is a middle-aged adult, so hey.
I suppose. But I want to sort of point something out is that we have sort of two adults and a kid. Could you theoretically sort of apply that to Mewtwo, and Satoshi or Ash? Could you sort of view it that way? Does it work? Am I just trying to put a square peg in a round hole or something there? Or what do you think?
Well, I mean, putting square pegs into round holes is what my podcast is all about. That is an interesting idea. Like there's a case to be made, like if we're thinking like Ash represents sort of the innocence of youth, and between Mew and Mewtwo, Mew having like the wisdom of the ancients, having been around and living life for a while, and Mewtwo not having a lot of life, but having a very cynically mature attitude toward it. Like there's a case to be made that there's some dichotomy between those three and the adults and child relationship in the song. There's something to be said there, I think.
Yeah, I'm not sure if that was intentional or just happy branding or what. 'Cause I'm not sure if they divvied up the lyrics in a particular way to perhaps make that a thing. I guess we may not know unless they put something out there for us to hear and stuff like that. But
definitely, since they did make some deliberate changes to who sang what lines, basically, like I'm sure there was some thought in it, but you're right, we may never know exactly what it was if they don't tell us.
And I guess we should say, how do you feel overall about these two versions? First of all, is there anything else about this new version that you think works better, either for any changes they made or the new art style, the 3D CG, or changes in musical tastes over the years? Any thoughts there, Anne?
Of the movie itself?
In relationship to the song.
In relationship to the song. I'm always up for trying something different, whether that's a new arrangement, a new recording, a different musical style. So in that sense, I very much appreciate this song. I've mentioned there are some aspects of how they divvied up the lyrics that really struck me as special and different. I do think Kobayashi re-recorded her lyrics because she sounds that bit much older, and I kind of love that extra couple decades of gravitas on her voice. She sounds a little different than she did 20 years ago, but she's been through a lot of life and a lot of Pokemon in that time. So there's a lot of that's emotionally very special to me. As I said before, though, I'm not sure I'm in love with this arrangement just listening to it. It doesn't charm me in quite the same. It doesn't speak to my personal emotional feelings about Pokemon and like the way the song struck me and continues to strike me on a deep emotional level. It's just musically nice, but not doing that same purpose, which is fine. It may fulfill that purpose for somebody else, but for me, I'm not super in love with it, but I am so glad I got to hear it because I did appreciate several little moments and some of the little changes.
Yeah, I think I know broad is deep in understanding of Japanese and whatnot. There are like the from the original version that get me a little bit differently, even though I've never seen the original animated version in Japanese. and and stuff like. But so I guess I do appreciate it. I'm glad they didn't just try and do a straight up remaster with this with the original song and try to do something a little bit different. Though I think that is somewhat appropriate.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, well, I think that gives us a good discussion of the Japanese song. Let's talk about the English one. So, like we said, there is a
Yes.
totally different song. We talked about the production with "Keep Evolving," like I said, written by Ed Goldfarb and performed by a lot of the folks who have done stuff for the last 5 or 6 movies. And the overall tone is where we usually start with this. And this one, it starts off reasonably dark, as actually some of the other ones do. I will give to add that a lot of his songs, when the character of the movie goes through sort of a character evolution, so to speak, that a lot of the times the end songs, I'm thinking specifically like the Hoopa movie, I think has a similar dynamic where there is sort of an opening up later in the song. Not that that doesn't happen with some of the other ones. I mean, The Power of One does that more gradually. The I'll Always Remember You does a kind of similar thing with that. So it's not unheard of or anything. But this one also seems to follow that general plan where there is a very dark and moody opening, and then the rest of the song is more bright, not maybe super cheerful, but relatively cheerful. And would you kind of does that make sense? Were those your thoughts? Did you have a different perspective? How did this strike you?
Very much the same way. And I mentioned in the same way Kaze to Ishini kind of fulfills an emotional purpose. When I heard this song, it was kind of that same vibe. Um, I think I've mentioned on my personal podcast, I struggle with some mental health issues and things. And one of the things I appreciate both about this song and the original Kaze to Ishini was like it opens up on that dark note that I think many of us can relate to. And then it takes you into a place where it's like you feel like it's going to be okay. Um, and hearing this song keep evolving, like it's a very different musical vibe, I think, than Kaze to Ishini, but it takes you on that same journey where you open up on the first couple chords and those lyrics, and it's like your kingdom of one, and um, you're feeling very alone and very upset. Um, and then it takes you on an emotional arc through those feelings to a place where it's still kind of in a darkish place, but you feel a little bit better and more confident about the light at the end of the tunnel. I very much like this song. And for a movie with Mewtwo, as I've said, I at 12 I related a lot to him as a teenager. I still kind of relate to him now with some of those feelings of being lost in your life. I think this kind of taps in very much to what Mewtwo's going through in this movie.
Yeah, you brought up the lyrics there, and I guess we should point out that this is not a song that's so seems like it's trying to evoke the Ash Pikachu relationship.
For a
Pardon
change.
the pun I'm about to do, but I do feel that was a very sensible choice. I think that had they tried to do that, that would have not have say reflected well. But it seems, at least in the preamble, to definitely be talking from Mewtwo's perspective. Heart of Stone and
Mhm.
Army of One and stuff like that. And the second, the rest of the song is much more sort of has more of a unity dynamic, sort of a versus the individual sort of feeling of the first part there. And I think that's a fair way of looking at it. And let's see.
Yeah, we haven't had
And
like the 20 years to sit with this the way we had with We're a Miracle. We'd had plenty of time to listen and watch the movie over and over and form our thoughts about how they connected. But, at first blush, this really, like in deliberate ways with like their lines about keep evolving and Army of One, and also in just like metaphorical ways, really seems to be honing in on what this movie was about and what happened in it to the characters in a way that some Pokemon songs don't always seem to do.
Yeah, I mean, granted, the evolution metaphor is maybe not perfect because, of course, not a single Pokemon, I believe, in this movie actually does do Pokemon evolution, regular or mega, even though some of them could over the course of this movie. They did not add any of that stuff in there, which they very well could have. Although, I guess getting into the Sword and Shield generation where mega evolution just really isn't a thing, maybe they didn't want to try and do that. I'm not sure. But so it's a metaphorical evolution, not in the usual Pokemon sense. They're not the literal sense. But yeah, I think it does cover those themes very well. How about let's talk about the song though emotionally? Do you think? Because we're gonna. Anne mentioned it, and we're definitely going to draw some comparisons, despite not being thematically the same thing. How does the song hit you emotionally, and how much emotion would you say it has in it?
A ton. Like, I think I cried the first time I listened to it. Like, there is a lot of pathos in Haven's lyrics and the way she portrays them through the song. There's a lot of deep feeling, and then the music supports that. Like, when you get to the chorus, like, there's a big swell of support underneath it musically. There's the moment there's a lot of musical things going on to make you feel the things. Yeah, like it's designed to take you from one place to another, to tell a complete story within a song, and it does that very well. There's a lot of deep feeling in this song, I think.
I wouldn't totally disagree with you, but I don't think. Yeah, sorry, alternate perspective. It's not a bad song by any means, but it didn't really give me an emotional, push. I think the way I think going back, we've discussed before, especially during like our Genesect and the Legend Awakened discussion about how difficult it might be to write a song that sort of fits the Mewtwo narrative and stuff like that. And I think this song does maybe about as well as you could think. Although, well, I do have that I guess you could call it a fantasy. I didn't get around to doing it for this. Was to rewrite. Those of you who have seen my other stuff know I'm a big fan of the Australian rock group In Excess, and I have considered rewriting their song "Searching," which was written in or released in 1997, a few years before this movie, to follow the Mewtwo storyline. And I might still do that someday. We'll see if I ever get around to actually doing that. And I did have some ideas for that. Maybe that would have worked just fine back in 1999 for this, but maybe not so much now. I don't know if that were somehow contractually possible. That would be interesting. But as far as this song here, I'm just, it's good, and there's some decent emotion behind it, but it didn't really hit me on a fundamental level. I think I'm not sure if that's just because of all the other musical stuff we'll be talking about with the movie or what. But Anne, I'm very glad you really enjoyed this. Like I said, it's by no means a bad song. I'm not going to exaggerate just to make a counterpoint and stuff like that, but it's good. It's maybe not as good as some other ideas that at least I would have liked to have seen. No guarantees, because I can't go to that alternate universe where that happens, but that's kind of the deal there. But any other thoughts on this song, musically or lyrically or otherwise, Anne?
Not at the moment. But you're right. Yes, music hits people differently. Like, this song may not have spoken to you as well as another one may have, and that's fine.
So I guess at this point, maybe we should go a little bit deeper. And do you think we should discuss We're Miracle deeper here and some of the stuff that's been going on with Christina lately, or should we maybe leave that for later?
We can do that now because, yeah, you've done a little digging and found some things.
Sure. Okay, well, we've been peppering in references to it, but obviously this song is definitely not "We're a Miracle," which, as opposed to "Don't Say You Love Me," which is a decent song, but we usually go with these discussions with if there are multiple songs in the end credits, whatever the first one is. And in the case of Pokemon the first movie, the English dub, that is in fact "We're a Miracle," and you know, even though Keep Evolving is obviously going for a different sound, which, like I said, is probably a good thing, especially since, if you want an Ash Pikachu song from Ed Goldfarb, I would say check out I Choose You from the movie of the same name from a couple of years ago. I think that fits that niche. That's another reason I didn't want them to try and do that. But despite them trying to avoid such a comparison, we're going to do such a comparison here because we would be remiss if we didn't. But We're a Miracle, first of all, despite what you may have heard or thought or whatever, not written for Pokemon the first movie, period. So based on some information I got from Todd Chapman, I wanted to do an interview, but he wasn't really available for that. But they did confirm that no, it wasn't written for Pokemon the first movie. It appears to have been recorded. He said when she came out to LA for the first time, it was part of a demo series. So earlier this week, I bought an ebook from really kind of the early 2000s that covers the early parts of Christina's career. I think it's called Christina Aguilera, A Star Is Made. It's an unauthorized biography, but they got some pretty good access there and whatnot, it seems. It's got some like spacing issues because I think they had to just scan in the actual pages to digitize it and use optical character recognition and all that fun stuff. And I think that caused some spacing issues, but it's like a $4 ebook if you want to take a look at it. Maybe a few semi-risque images in there, but otherwise not too bad, and a little bit of language here and there. But as far as the song itself, so Christina did really 2 demo tapes. She did one before she was signed to an album, and that would eventually become her Just Be Free album that she really didn't want released back in like 2001. That had been recorded 5 or 6 years before that. And later, around the time that she got picked to do Reflection for Mulan, speaking of movies getting remade, she got signed to a contract with RCA, and they asked her to do a demo tape. And I think what happened is, I like to refer to We're a Miracle as Reflection's lesser-known sibling song is probably the best way to think about it. It was actually co-written by David Zappel, who also wrote Reflections. Musical similarities between these songs beyond just who's singing it, one of the reasons why. But I suspect that outside of the sessions for doing Reflection, for stuck around for a few extra days to hear the orchestral part of that song to be recorded after she had done her vocals and stuff like that. I think that's about when this was recorded, which would have put it in early 1998. Pokemon the first movie had even been released in Japan. That would come like July of that year is when the Mewtwo Strikes Back was released in Japan. Now, what makes people think this was rewritten is there actually are 2 versions of We're a Miracle. The first one has Todd Chapman and David Zappel listed as writers. The version on the Pokemon soundtrack, which I guess came later, but probably was recorded around the same time, also lists Christina Aguilera. And from what I've read, may actually be the first thing of hers where she has a writing credit on that was commercially released. So that probably gives it, if that's the case, it probably gives it a bit of a special meaning to her as well to have something out there. But again, I'm not sure how that came about. It has, as far as I know, nothing to do with the movie. It's just something that maybe she decided I'm going to, test my writing skills and do an alternate take. The quote unquote non-Pokemon version is more about a lover's relationship versus the version you hear in the first movie in credits, which is more about a friendship. And like I said, I do not know what really spurred that on, but as far as I know, has no relationship to the movie. And that might explain why Christina doesn't seem to talk about it too much. She doesn't want to spoil that. She knows it has a very special meaning. So I would guess that that's one reason. then it's certainly not as famous as Reflection. Let's be honest here. Even as good as a song and as good as a home as I think it found. Okay, so with some of that out of the way, by the way, I should point out in that biography, I learned a few other interesting things, like back in like 1995. So before Pokemon came out, even in Japan, but she did have like a stint there where she did sort of a duet with a somewhat well-known Japanese performer. And in case you're wondering if, well, maybe when Mulan came to Japan, she got to go out for the premiere of that or something, on a press junket or something, and maybe she got exposed to Pokemon that way. And well, that's certainly possible. Mulan would have released in Japan at the end of September 1998, which is more than 2 months. So the Mewtwo Strikes Back, as successful as it was in Japan, I don't think she would have had a shoe-in opportunity to see it there if that had in fact happened. I couldn't find anything suggesting that she got to do that. I do know that Aaron Carter got to go to the Australian premiere of Pokemon the first movie because he had a song on the soundtrack. But as far as like going back to Mulan, I can't vouch for that way. So it's not a case where either or she had been exposed to there. It's like, it's coming to America. Let's capitalize on this. Or she had seen the movie and says, holy cow, that song I rewrote on my own accord syncs up with this movie or anything like that. But no, not as far as I know there. So if something comes out later and I would like to know how it actually ended up in the orbit, because it was based on a mastering CD I was able to pick up off of eBay and I have an unboxing for. It was apparently a very late addition to the soundtrack, but someone discovered it, made the connection between the lyrics of that song and the plot of this movie. All right. I think that is quite an info dump there. Appreciate all of you who sort of how that I love to know more. Like I said, since it does not have a direct tie into the movie, it just happens to fit almost scarily well to the movie, as well as the Ash Pikachu relationship overall. I think that may be one reason there's just not as much, because some of the people involved, including Christina, may just want to preserve sort of the quote unquote illusion, knowing that there are kids out there that this is a very special song to them, like Reflection, and just wants to sort of stay in that orbit. Any thoughts on the stuff I just put out there before I do want to discuss this a little more. I don't want to make this a Christina Aguilera special episode or anything like that. But given how close we are to the Mulan remake, we kind of have to, talk about the elephant in the room.
Yeah, like I don't know. We're a Miracle has always been, as you say, a special song to me, just because despite not being written for the movie, it does fit so well. Like it's hard to compare it to Keep Evolving, because I think you mentioned like it kind of fits more the Ash and Pikachu relationship than the Mewtwo story arc. And there's I'm kind of just having some interesting thoughts kind of beginning, where it's like when I was that age when it first came out, I was there for Ash and Pikachu. That's why we all wanted to see the movie, is because we fell in love with the anime and those characters. I think now as an adult, I appreciate more Mewtwo's role as co-protagonist and his emotional journey. So there's a part of me that right now is gravitating a bit more toward Keep Evolving, but it's very interesting to have like those two very different perspectives, because from Ash and Pikachu's perspective, it's a completely different movie, and obviously a completely different song would represent that.
Yeah, I get what you're saying there. To be honest, although I knew for a while that this would probably have a different ending theme song than We're a Miracle, there's other ways they could have used it. At the very least, I would have liked to have seen, get that on digital services, because that song is still generally not on digital services, because at least you'd want to like capitalize on the remake that way. Because it wasn't written for the movie, I think that the licensing for it looks a little different than a song like The Power of One, or really most of the songs in the Pokemon 2000 soundtrack. Basically, I think like virtually everything except Flying Without Wings has some sort of Nintendo of America copyright on it. And like I said, since this one was not written or changed or re-recorded or anything like that, but I kind of knew going in that it wasn't going to be the ending theme song because some stuff that was hinted at. And why it isn't in there, let me just say, I did try to contact management both for Christina Aguilera and for Blessed Unit Souls to see if they had any comment. Neither of them got back to me. Not a complete surprise, but they may not want to say too much because they don't want to, make any enemies or say something they regret later or something like that. But still, I wanted to give them a shot to say, hey, this is what we tried. Because I have to imagine that at least one of those acts, if not both of them, when they found out some way or another about this movie, that they would have contacted the Pokemon Company to at least try to get something together.
Yeah, Blessed Union of Souls in it, especially. Their music is not the type that kids who are listening to Pokemon the first movie would have normally listened to. I think like they were probably not on the same radar. Maybe Christina Aguilera was with Reflection and the like, but it was an opportunity for a lot of us to get to know them a little bit and get to have an appreciation for their wider catalog of music, and like to be able to get that with an entire new generation. Not everybody gets that chance. So I imagine if it were presented to them, that would be something they'd be interested in.
Yeah, so it's possible either artistically or whatever the Pokemon Company wasn't interested, or monetarily they couldn't work something out. Because if money was no object, I don't know what the budgeting is for these things. We may talk a little bit about that in the movie discussion portion about whether this movie got sort of the push and whatnot. It should have, either in our own minds or commercially speaking, if they missed an opportunity. But I don't see a reason why, if they had the money and the time and whatnot, they couldn't have, either remastered or outright re-recorded We Are a Miracle, and maybe even had Christina do like a Spanish version, which we did not get with the original one. And had they known how successful that stuff would be, We Are a Miracle did end up as like the B-side to What a Girl Wants, and probably pushed a few extra copies of that single so people could get that, which was a very successful, #1 chart-topping song, and that probably didn't hurt. And stuff like that. But I think we could be doing that. And, you could even do weird stuff. Like I think Christina has a couple kids, one of whom is about Ash's age. So if they wanted to do like a music video or something like that, they could, if they wanted to. I mean, on her own, even without Pokemon Company, if they own all the rights to, if Christina's side owns all the rights to the song, they could at least put together like a lyric video or something like that. As long as it didn't reference anything from the movie, they'd be legally okay, I believe. Like I said, I haven't had a chance to extensively talk about the song with some other folks. But as Keep Evolving is not a terrible song, but like I said, they made a good choice not trying to go through the same route. But even so, it's I have to say I would have probably preferred doing something with We Are a Miracle, just to kind of give the parallelism there, or whatever you want to say. And I suspect that had this movie, instead of coming through Netflix, gone through, I guess the two studios that would have been most likely would have either have been Disney or Warner Brothers, since Disney has the TV rights to the Pokemon series at this time, as well as most of the movies. And, Warner Brothers, of course, did the original movie, the original version of the movie, and also distributed Detective Pikachu when they inherited it. So they would have sort of the thing there, and I would expect both of them at least Warner Brothers would have made some sort of inquiry into this and say, hey, is there something we can do here? But like I said, we'll talk more about how this maybe we think should have been distributed a little bit differently. But Anne, any thoughts on I've been kind of monopolizing the time there, sorry. That's what sort of fascinates me about We Are a Miracle, is that it's one of those songs I definitely always want to know more about, just because it is sort of a winning the lottery type of song, that it just happens to fit almost perfectly into the shape they were looking for, despite having no relation production-wise to the movie.
Yeah, when moments like that happen, when you're creating something, it's really special. Yeah, We're a Miracle is always going to kind of have its own little special place in the Pokemon world, I think. Like, I mean, I don't know what else to say about it just because it wasn't in the movie. But it's hard not to talk about, not to bring it into the discussion somehow.
Yeah, I suppose if they wanted to like not have a re-recorded version of it, but maybe I don't know, save themselves a bit of money and insert like a few notes from it somewhere in the movie, I think a good spot for it would have been to put maybe a few notes from the chorus into that scene where right after Ash pulls Pikachu out of the cloning machine and stuff like that. You know, it's in the original dub version. I have no idea if they've ever planned anything there, but that little spot there is silent for a few seconds, and maybe that would have been a good spot to insert a few lines from a song, a few notes into the score if they had the time, either then or now. But you had mentioned Blessed Union of Souls. Let's talk about the other song that some folks have felt is glaringly missing. I would say even in, all due respect to Christina, like I said, quite busy over the next few weeks with the new Mulan remake, and she's done some shows recently in Vegas of her music and stuff like that. So she's quite busy. But Blessed Union of Souls, they're still around. In fact, actually, a couple of days before we recorded this, they had one of their songs used in an episode of CBS's The Young and the Restless. So kind of an interesting thing there. I guess that we can't say they're not totally off the map, but what do you think about not using some version of Brother My Brother in this?
It makes me sad because I really liked that song. I know not everybody loved it and its placement. But I did. It like all the other music, it fulfilled an emotional purpose for me, and it was different than the Japanese scores choices. So it, made me realize different things about the movie. So I'm sad to not see it. That said, I don't mind them doing something different. I would like, I'd like to see it I would have liked to see something done with it to at least put it on the soundtrack or the end credits. Cause to me, it is always going to be just a little bit of a Pokemon song. But yeah, I don't know necessarily that it would have had the same impact as it did before. So I don't know that I necessarily wanted it put back in, but I am sorry that it's not part of it in some way.
Yeah. For those of you out there who are maybe like, well, I kind of would have liked it, but I'm not sure. I'm not sure I want something that's a straight up rendition of the 99 version in there. I would suggest, we mentioned it last year when we talked about our some live versions of Pokemon music, but there's an alternative arrangement of Brother My Brother that Blessed Union of Souls uses in their live concerts, and you can actually hear a version of this on most streaming services. It's at their Live at Never on Sunday album that they produced about 5 years ago. And I think that version of it, I pointed out to someone on Twitter, and they said, "Yeah, I think this one might have worked there if they had done this." And just personally, me, I do feel like that scene is kind of empty without something more musically emotional in that spot. Maybe that's me just being used to the 99 English dub and whatnot, but speaking of social media, not usually it's a bit more of a funhouse mirror reflection than I think some people realize of the world, but definitely a lot of "Where's Brother My Brother" comments on there. We'll be bringing up some stuff I found on social media in a little bit after sort of the main discussion. But if you have any thoughts on that, do let me know. I would love to hear your thoughts.
In the chat, Kevin Cutliff points out that they use the Japanese scoring for this movie, so there's really no way for them to have added in a Western song for that scene, which is fair. I still miss it.
I don't know about that. I think they could certainly just skip the Japanese score in that spot and just put the other song in.
True. You can always do a hybrid, make choices, but yeah. I don't know if I have the same feeling as you do about it feeling empty, but yeah, having that history with that scene that we do, like, it's hard not to view every scene of the movie with a comparison of like, last time they did it like this. Mm. Like, I don't dislike the way that scene plays out in this new adaptation, but at the same time, yeah, it is hard to reconcile the fact that I do just miss that song. It was a good song.
Well, unlike We're a Miracle, Brother My Brother, easily available on all the music stores and streaming services pretty much. You shouldn't have any trouble finding that there. It's on one of their greatest hits album. And then, like I said, the live version, I guess they had to jump through. I assume they must have had to jump through some hoops since that is a Nintendo / Pokemon owned song, I believe, to get that out there and work on that. But I guess as the Pokemon audience has grown up and started attending more of their shows, it's like their third or fourth or fifth most popular song, probably, depending on how you measure and where you look. But still something important to the band. And I would have liked to have had some version of it with this. And it's kind of disappointing, at least to me and to a number of other folks, that it isn't in there.
Yeah.
All right. Well, I do hope that folks in the chat can wait just a moment. I need to get some more water because we've been going for about an hour and I need to get some more water. So I will be right back in a few moments.
I'm holding on the fort. I don't know what to say. How can I entertain you guys? And I guess something to think about is what other songs on that soundtrack from the Pokemon first movie, if we had a chance to put them in here somewhere, whether it was just in the credits or just on the soundtrack, where would we use them? Because we didn't have the Pikachu short for Vacation or anything.
All right. Somehow, I kind of knew this would be one of our longer discussions. Oops, sorry for bumping the microphone there. All right. So yeah, appreciate you having about a little bit of patience there while we readjust. Like I said, if you have any comments, excuse me, about this one, I guess we can talk briefly about the other quote-unquote.
Yeah, I don't know where Don't Say You'd Love Me would never necessarily find a place in this movie. But again, it's hard not to look at everything and be like, and that's different, and that's different, and that's different.
Yeah, as far as the ending credits, of course, there are 3 other songs. There's Hey You Free Up Your Mind, which is a fine song. I they could just play, if they did a new version of We're a Miracle, they could just do that in its entirety, I think, and fill up the credits. And there's If Only Tears Could Bring It Back, which, by the way, is on the digital services. It's part of the weird compilation album that somehow posted up there. I don't know exactly what happened with that. And then Don't Say You Love Me is, with a slight lyrical difference, is available pretty much anywhere. And although that's very closely promoted with the movie, mainly because I think they were just able to do more with that. And M2M was an Atlantic artist, so they had kind of the incentive there. So, yeah, I guess we should talk about. So that sort of tidies up the end credits portion there. But as far as I'm concerned, yeah, We're a Miracle, as far as the end credits goes, is sort of the biggest missing thing there to me. With all due respect to Ed Goldfarb and the staff there. So you talked a little bit about the score, and this uses a relatively close. It's based on the Japanese score of this remake, which is largely based on the Japanese score of the original version. And so this is kind of Shinji Miyazaki's last Pokemon movie, at least for the time being, since he is kind of he's like in his early to mid 60s, so he's kind of, I guess, maybe retiring or moving on to other things after about 20 years with the series. But I don't think any of his work is really all terrible or anything. But those of you who have listened to the series know that I'm not necessarily the biggest fan of his work either. And part of it is just it's not necessarily what I would be interested in. But as far as this remake was considered, it's parts of it were none of it was ear splitting or anything like that. I do not want to characterize it that way because that's not fair to him. But there wasn't a ton I found super memorable either. And now that I've set that up, why don't you give your overall thoughts on the score?
This is one of the movies, like Japanese scoring in general and Shinji Miyazaki with Pokemon movies make good use of silence, or not always good use of silence. They make a lot of use of silence. And this is one movie where I think the silence works. It's very weighty and heavy. One of the scenes that I think of is when they kind of brave their way through the ocean and they make it to the palace and they meet Nurse Joy on the dock and then walk up the stairs into the dining hall. In English, there's kind of like some spooky undertones in the original version, but in one of the things that struck me about the Japanese version of the movie back in the day was that it's pretty much silent. And in this remake, that's kind of the same vibe. It's almost dead silence as they're coming up to that door. It's just the sounds of their footsteps and doors opening, and like it creates a mood. And I understand that not everybody maybe gets along with that, and other places where the music is sparse, usually during very moments where they want you to be thoughtful and kind of process and digest like what you're seeing visually. I find it's a very deliberate choice and it works for this movie. There's a lot of very heavy things going on here, and sometimes I think with the nuances that go on in this movie, and some very subtle and yet heavy questions that they're asking, we don't necessarily want a big score all the time. We want to have those moments where it's very little music or nothing at all, so that we can just appreciate kind of the stark contrast and the bleak horror that is this situation, and why the Pokemon fighting each other is wrong, why Mew and Mewtwo's animosity toward each other is wrong, why the humans are kind of having their moment of horror as they're watching this all go down, even though Pokemon battles are just a day-to-day part of their lives. I think this is a movie where that silence and that sparsity really works. So I don't mind it. I seem to like it a lot more than you do.
Well, there are definitely little periods of silence, even in the English dub version here and there. It's not like it's completely wall to wall music or stuff like that. There's a few quiet passages here and there. I did not get a chance to rewatch the English version for this discussion. I just couldn't squeeze all that in. It was more important to make sure I listened to the new music and whatnot. But there are kind of like two scenes I want to talk about score wise. Well, maybe more than that, but actually, I think there are about three that I can think of. But we can kind of go in order. So the first one I want to talk about is the Dragonite going off to deliver the invitations part. Now in the Japanese version, they have, I would say, a decent enough song there. Like I said, the scoring style for the Japanese one is definitely more broad strokes than the English one, although it gets like the music for the short, which is not associated with this at all, this remake at all, is in the English score at least action by action, but the English dub 99 song that they used their cue is called Dragonite Takes Flight, and that one is really sticks in my mind, and not having it there, Japanese score works, but it's not the kind of not as triumphant as I would like for seeing a Pokemon like that in flight. Any thoughts on that scene?
I don't have a ton of thoughts. Like, I'd have to listen to it again. I don't have a real solid opinion. Like, they're just different to me. It's not my favorite scene in the movie, so I'm not as invested.
I suppose you're right there, but it is a very well loved theme, at least on my end. And then we'll talk about when the starter clones are fighting the original starter fully evolved. So, Venusaur, Blastoise, Charizard. The music in the Japanese version is decent, but again, and maybe some of this is just the radio programmer in me, because you can like the movie one way or the other, but I think it's fairly evident that from a radio perspective, the English dub score to the 99 version is what you would choose to play on a radio station that did movie scores. If you were doing it on the purpose of sort of a hybrid of like maybe traditional pop radio and soundtracks sort of meeting halfway in the middle. And stuff of that nature. I did generally find that the score elements that were more melodic in nature would be more popularly received back in the PIRN days. And but 3-on-3, the English score element there, I like the way it builds between each of those three battles. And going back to Dragon Knight Takes Flight, I believe it uses a few notes for there during the Charizard versus Charizard battle to sort of bring those back as sort of the flight theme of the movie. And certainly from a musical perspective, or certainly from, like I said, from a radio perspective or from a music by itself perspective, I think it maybe does a better job. And it's what I would have kind of preferred to have in this scene. They would have had to, for a lot of these cues, they would have had to redo them and lengthen some of the stuff for the lengthened scenes and stuff like that. But it's something I suppose they could have done. Any thoughts on that musical scoring choices for that scene, Anne?
That's interesting. Like, I'd honestly not considered that. And that is interesting because I do think in Japan there's still radio, at least in the past few years, has been still kind of a big local radio stations, and playing anime music and soundtrack music is still a thing. So yeah, that's an interesting thing to consider. You have a lot more experience with this and knowing what works and what doesn't than I do. But that honestly is something that never entered my mind, and now I have things to think about.
Yeah. So I think, like I said, from a radio perspective, it's pretty easy to delineate these. Which one you prefer is somewhat a matter of preference, but I think I would definitely have preferred that. And then, of course, we've got to talk about sort of the climax, as it were, of the movie, where Ash sacrifices himself. Spoiler alert. And gets petrified, and Pikachu tries to shock it back to life, and then we get the tears and stuff like that, and all other things of that nature. And I think there's definitely some scoring, especially after the tears start coming in the Japanese version. But I think most of the folks, if you're listening to this one, you definitely would immediately recognize, even without the movie, the Tears of Life cue that comes up in that portion. I really, not having that, I usually wind up crying watching this movie, especially as I've grown to like it more in that part. And this version with the different music, I'm sure it definitely worked for a lot of folks, judging from social media and whatnot. But in this particular case, it just, it was kind of there, and I felt a lot less emotional impact on it. Maybe for other reasons too. But if I suppose if there were especially those last two score elements in the English version, I would have, if I had to pick and choose which ones to bring over to this version, those would be ones I would want to have represented in some way.
Tears of Life is a very good song. Like, and in the world of Pokemon scores, where we don't have a ton of super iconic tracks, like, it is one of the ones that people recognize.
Yeah, there was a cover. There are several covers. There's not as many covers as, say, The Legend Comes to Life / Lugia's theme, which,
wins all the prizes.
Like I said,
Yeah.
we'll talk about whether we would want to see this treatment for other Pokemon movies in the future. But Tears of Life, there was a cover put out, I guess, last year by the Vitamin String Quartet group.
Oh.
And it's part of their Geek Wedding Forever series, actually, which is kind of. I used it on my Detective Pikachu Pokemon episode I did for my video game music radio show that I do around here sometimes. So it's definitely made an impact there, and I did see some comments about how when people talked about the new score, how they said, yeah, that scene did not have the emotional impact without that music. So, you know, I very much expected some divided opinions on this remake, but that was sort of one of the other parts of the score that I think, you know, like I said, I definitely prefer the other version. I think they did some nice things in these various places, and it's a bit of a different style. Having not really listened to the score, to the Japanese version of the score until now, and seeing this version, it's, to be honest, from all the other movies Shinji Miyazaki scored, it's about what I expected. And, you know, not sure exactly what I want to say with all of that, but I am interested to see how this new person works out. Like I said, I'm not going to say Shinji Miyazaki, oh, he's this terrible person that's so overrated by the purists. You know, no, that's not really how I feel about it. I do feel he did better work when he had some sort of thing to go on, like you know, the legend theme in the second movie, or Aracion in the Darkrai movie, or when he was sort of like the non-Koba stuff in the Latias and Latios, the fifth movie. I think, you know, some of the stuff he produced there is some of his better work in that regard. But you know, at least it's more interesting to me. But as time went on, I think there were just fewer and fewer things that, at least from a radio perspective, I felt were really interesting. So I guess that's kind of my 2 cents on the score. Anne, anything else?
I don't know if I have that much more to say about it.
All right. Well, there's definitely one more musical aspect we should talk about, and that's the opening for this.
Mm-hmm.
So, as much as we've been talking about how much stuff from the original English dub did not make it in here, first of all, on the Japanese side, they use a new version of Aim to be a Pokemon Master, although I think it's very close to the original 98 version that they did for the original theatrical release. Like, there aren't very many differences at all.
Mm-hmm.
And then on the English side, they have what's called the Mewtwo mix of the Pokemon theme. It is very clearly patterned, but by no means identical to the Billy Crawford version from the 99 dub of the first movie. But you can definitely tell there's a lot of elements that are fairly one-to-one. That being said, I did want to talk about some real differences, at least between like the album cut of that song versus the of the Billy Crawford version versus the use in here and use in the movie. So one big difference I noticed is that in the movie, the original, the 99 dub, they have you know, little parts where there are sound effects or little voice clips from Ash primarily, that go over the song there, and the song is edited in such a way that I think it integrates quite well in the 99 version, and that is largely, I would say, absent from this remake, and I do kind of miss that, you know, and I miss not having Ash say, you know, nice job, Bulbasaur, you did it, or having the pirate guy's Pokeball come out right before the second verse starts.
Mm-hmm.
And stuff like that. And I mean that those actions are more or less in there, but the vocal samples are not. And to be honest, that, at least in terms of how it's used in the movie, kind of does diminish it musically for me. And did you have an experience like that, or?
I don't know if it was quite the same, but it kind of along those same lines of just, yeah, like since they're doing a shot-for-shot remake pretty much with this new adaptation, you notice when things are different. And that was one of the things I noticed was like, there used to be a word here. There used to be a sound effect here. There, things like that. And that is kind of locked in our memories of how we perceived the movie and how we perceived that scene. I don't know that there's necessarily any way to win in that situation when you're making something that is almost identical yet not quite, but I definitely noticed.
Yeah, so for me, I think that because that's one of the big compliments I have about the 99 dub version is how, and I guess by extension, some of what the 98 Japanese version is how integrated and well edited that opening sequence is, and tightly. I don't know, they've done battling opening sequences many times later in the franchise, and kind of yet. Never, to be honest, quite gotten something quite that tight and that good. Not that, excuse me, not that everything has to be, just like that. I don't want every opening to be a battle sequence, and I don't think everything needs to be quite like that. But it is always fun when they can follow the dynamics there. So we'll see how all that. We'll see what they kind of do in the future going forward with this. But I'd be interested in some other things, I suppose. I wanted to go with that, to be honest. Sorry, folks. That
It's all good.
happens sometimes in these rough cuts when we do these.
These early morning ones, especially.
Yeah, as far as like the other sort of structural thing that I noticed is that the bridge song was moved earlier into the sequence. I don't know if that was just to make it fit better and stuff like that. And I don't think it was that way in the 99. It was still near there at the end, but and I also noticed. So definitely some differences, but very clearly patterned on that. If you want to know more about like that movie version of the first movie theme, I talk about it a little bit with Neil Jason, who did the arrangements, and is strangely not credited in the credits. You think he'd have, since it's clearly based on that, you think he'd have some sort of like arrangement credit or something like that, since it's based on his original arrangement very clearly. But in any event, musically, what do you think of those two versions on the English side there, Anne?
On the one hand, like as I always say, I appreciate trying something different. I don't think it opens as strong when it hits that first electric guitar note. I think this new version, like it's got a different quality to that guitar. Like it's almost more of the staticky distortion feel than the note. I just don't feel that it opens in the same way like that first original Pokemon theme just like pierced through everything. That said, like this new arrangement, I believe like it's Haven and some other people are credited as doing additional voices for it. So they try a lot of interesting things. They hit the harmonies hard. I appreciate a lot of the little things that they were doing. At the end of the day, it's the Pokemon theme. I'm satisfied. I don't know if it's my favorite version of it, but I'm satisfied.
Yeah, that is one thing I would like to try in the future, is to do an episode where we discuss all the official versions of the English Pokemon theme and sort of decide which one is our favorite. That's like a future discussion. I think we want to do. At least I want to do it. But as far as like the 99 versus this version, I think the 99 version is maybe a notch or two above this one, but neither one is bad. So I'm not sure how much else I have exactly to say there, but that's about how I feel about that. Like I said, mostly my thing is like the editing and the little voice and sound effect samples aren't there. There is a little bit of like Pikachu zapping you can hear in it, and they did fix the golem. They took that out for like a drowsy or something, so it wouldn't be immune to electricity. So that works. I assume like their other option was to have Pikachu use Iron Tail instead or something like that, but which would have been, I guess, kind of interesting to have it wipe away all three of them with one Iron Tail. Would have been kind of fun, but
continuity? What is continuity? I don't know.
Well, I think that is going to cover it's taken a while, which I figured it would, given all the comparisons and contrasts and
Yeah.
stuff like that. If you have any
Yeah, I would like
comment,
to point out just with, Masase Pokemon Master, like, it's just a remastering, it's not a remake, but that remastering, you kind of hear some of the subtler parts of the instrumentation that I found were very interesting, like, I caught that this time. And that's pretty much true of every remake of Masase Pokemon Master, I think, but yeah, like, this new remastering, like, just certain instrumental bits stuck out a little bit more than they had previously, so it kinda just felt a little bit fresh.
I suppose I do think with the English dub Pokemon theme, they've done more over the years experimentally with it. I mean, obviously,
Mhm.
my favorite AMD Pokemon Masters is still the accordion version from movie 5, but even in that case, they still it's still, all due respect to Rika Matsumoto, it's the same vocals, nothing super different except in a few places. They haven't experimented with it really, honestly, as much as the things there. All
Mhm,
right.
mhm.
Well, as you can kind of guess, in living in this modern age, we didn't have this back in '99 or '98, but today we have this wonderful thing that doesn't always provide a very objective view of things called social media. But I did grab some comments on there that I thought were interesting and I wanted to discuss here. If you have any comments in the chat room or if you're watching this on replay, go ahead and give us a comment on this and we'll try to work those in. But to give you a few minutes to do that, I'm going to punch up a little slideshow I have with some various comments. Okay, should be seeing a nice little black screen there. So yeah, any comments you have on any of the musical stuff, the score in there, the songs that aren't in there, go ahead and type those out. But so I collected a bunch of stuff off of Twitter. That's one of the nice things about these premieres these days. I try to go in and find some comments I find interesting about this movie and its music. But let's go ahead and start with just a few of them. So here are a few comments about the Tears of Life scene and how there were some folks. I did, there were some folks who said, "Oh, good, it uses the Japanese score and whatnot." I did find one person who was able to sort of elaborate beyond it being just sort of a sorry to use this terminology, sort of a checkbox thing. Like they actually provided some thoughts on why they preferred it, which we'll get to in a little bit. But I think the comments on, if someone mentioned music, they tended to comment more negatively as time after the first day or so, and some folks went back to see it. They said, what was missing in the score, or Brother My Brother, or some of the other songs that they wanted to have in there that weren't in there. Here, like I said, you can see some Pikachu crying and talking about the score, and I wouldn't have expected them to use like the original dub score as is. I would expect them to do some rearranging and extending and playing around with it. But it's clearly there's some folks who were expecting to hear certain themes in there and just didn't get them, and it affected the emotionality on there. Like there's one with crying Pikachu didn't feel the same, and the clones and originals fighting wasn't as impacting, or seeing Pikachu cry. So definitely some thoughts out there that if you were less emotionally affected by this remake, that may have been kind of a reason. Like I said, I try not to have too much of an agenda. I always like to separate what works for me versus what I kind of expected. Let's see. And lest you think, I was able to find some foreign comments. There were actually a lot of foreign comments on various aspects of this movie, which was really nice. It kind of shows what a broad impact. But there were actually, I even found some foreign stuff where folks lamented about the songs that were not in there. So we can see
Huh.
one where someone thought that where was Brother My Brother? And then over on the right side, these are both from someone in a Spanish-speaking country. This one on the right here, if you're watching this on live, is it says, I really wanted to say that they felt very fortunate their childhood. They had a couple that their favorite singer participated in the soundtracks of 2 of their favorite movies, Mulan and Mewtwo Strikes Back. So I think we know who that is. It's obviously 98 Degrees. No, nothing against 98 Degrees. They do actually, that's another parallel between those 2 movies musically, is they both, the soundtracks at least, both have songs by those 2 artists, which is kind of interesting. Apparently he looked to try and find We Are Miracle, and as we mentioned earlier, it's not on most of the digital surfaces. It's sort of in this limbo state. I wish I knew exactly what was the hang up. If they were, hopefully they'll find some way. Maybe Christina someday will put out a compilation of all her like movie songs. I looked it up. There's a ton of them. There's like enough to fill a full album as long as they can get all the rights together for it, which is kind of impressive. I think she's trying to follow maybe the Weird Al career path. Without necessarily being a comedy artist, to try and get new folks interested in her music on a generational basis. So it wasn't just, I mean, maybe not the hugest surprise that a Spanish-speaking person would be into Christina Aguilera, but still something I wanted to mention. Okay, so this was sort of the one more descriptive song, or the one more descriptive comment I could find on the score being changed to use something, the Japanese version, basically. And I asked this person to elaborate, and they were able to provide me some stuff. Really enjoy it. I guess the term they used was samples in the orchestral score, and I asked for a little bit of an elaboration. Excuse me. And this person came up with a comparison to the Sonic OST. I'm not sure. I don't think this person is referring to the recently released Sonic the Hedgehog movie, but more the games. And a certain meme Soulja Boy song. I only know like the Soulja Boy Tell 'em, that one, but maybe that's something else. Felt it gave it an older and more grandiose, and I wouldn't use this word necessarily, but intense sound to it. And do you have any thoughts on the ones I have up right now?
I'm kind of still processing what this person has written. I'm not sure if I necessarily understand enough about the one memed Soulja Boy song to really comment there. But yeah, I think I understand what they're going for with the older feel. Like, these are some interesting observations. I like that they're able to put some of their thoughts into words, because a lot of my thoughts about the score are impressions that I'm not sure how to voice. But a lot of this is ringing true to me.
Yeah, like I said, I'm kind of indifferent to it. It's not, as you can probably guess by my comments here, and I'm not saying you're some horrible, dumb person if you don't agree with my position. That's not what we do here. We are Midwest nice. We are not uncritical, but this is not the musical direction I would have personally taken, not being fully aware of like the budgetary and whatnot constrictions they might have there. But appreciate to this person for at least being able to elaborate a little bit on it, because usually when I hear people talk about Shinji Miyazaki, I get more of a vibe of like they're angry whenever his stuff gets replaced, and it's like, I don't think it's awful or anything, but usually the dub stuff has come across better to me, and things of that nature. All right, I think I got one more here. These are actually kind of a few more miscellaneous comments. The one on the left is just talking about the, let's see, didn't really catch the feels, but, these are 2 comments. Sorry, let me restart this one. So I found a couple comments about the English ending theme song. I believe these are both there. About the music and art in the end credits. The art in the end credits is not a CGI recreation scene. That's actually all like designed to mimic various hand-drawn styles, which I think is kind of a neat thing that's sometimes done with CGI movies, is they take stuff and do like hand-drawn representations in there. And another person said, called the English Anything Sad Sounding, and I like these lyrics. So some comments on Keep Evolving, I suppose.
I'm with you. We're on a vibe.
Well, there's a tragic quality to that one. I'll give it that. We did get a few comments in the chat room right now about. I think Kevin is referring to the dub of this remake that during the Pikachu crying scene, the dub actually doesn't. You don't actually hear Pikachu crying or whatever because they dubbed the music over it. That scene there. I'm not sure. I think that's what he's referring to there. Maybe I'm wrong about that, but I definitely know in the in the 99 dub version, you can definitely when Tears of Life play, you can definitely hear Pikachu in a lot of that. So it's
I definitely have opinions about that. Like, Ikue breaks me. Like, she did so freaking good in that movie, and like I definitely respect the choice. Like, there's definitely a definite choice to maybe kind of pull back on Pikachu and bring in some of the other Pokemon. It does give, as I said in the comments, like a very different sense of atmosphere and weight. But my gosh, like I think people who are talking about like I didn't feel the same with Pikachu crying, part of that might be because you didn't hear Pikachu crying. She wrecked us with her first performance in that original movie. To take that out in any degree, or even and I also feel like the scene was just cut shorter in general on that front. Obviously, we're going to feel differently about it.
Yeah, I mean, even going to, there's a little bit of Pikachu, sad Pikachu in Detective Pikachu in one of the flashback scenes there. Okay, so Kevin just got into us, but I'm thinking in Detective Pikachu, that also gets me a little bit, even though it's a much shorter, smaller amount of crying in there when in the flashback when Harry's, or I think it's the elder Goodman is lying on the ground there. But let's see. So Kevin gave us a little bit more of a comment. So like when Pikachu cries in movie 22, you see all the other Pokemon crying, but they're silent. The dub adds their voices over them in that scene. And I think that part at least is also in the original version. The 99 dub version also has that, if I remember correctly.
I think it did to a point. Yeah, I feel that scene just overall is shorter, and I don't love that. I liked having to sit with our grief, basically.
Yeah, I think having the stuff there is like I said, I think it's definitely different in the different versions, and I guess that's something to pay attention to the next time I go through and watch each of those. Well, we've definitely spent our time on this one as far as just the music, and I think that's going to be there. I think my overall opinion is I definitely prefer the 99 dub on a musical level. Sorry to say this. Well, nothing in this new dub I would say is awful or anything. It feels like a step back, and it kind of diminishes my overall opinion of the movie there. So I don't despise this movie or anything because of its music, but I do feel it's a lesser movie to me based on that. And what are your kind of overall thoughts on the music?
Well, this movie in general, like, feels like someone brought you out a second dessert. Like, you don't need a second dessert, but you're not going to turn it down. So I don't feel disappointed just because it's just more. That said, there are some things I agree with and some things I don't agree with. I love Keep Evolving. I enjoy some of the musical choices in Shinji Miyazaki's score, and the fact that English speakers get to experience it, even if they don't necessarily always like it as much as the original dub score. So yeah, I can always just go back and watch whatever version of the movie I prefer whenever I feel like it. So I don't feel disappointed too much. This movie is just extra. So I can take the good, and the stuff that I don't love as much doesn't bother me. I think it's pretty obvious, though, this is not necessarily my go-to. When I want to watch this Pokemon story, this is not going to be my go-to movie, musically or otherwise. But there is a lot of good happening here that I appreciate.
I think that's kind of how I feel about it. Like I said, musically, there's no part that really jumps out to me and say, oh, they really move things up a big amount there versus an aspect of the other one. But I think part of that is me, even though I like a lot of the Japanese music, especially the vocal music, I think prefer things to be more thematic. And with the score being from the Japanese version, well, I'm sure these are ingrained into the heads of folks who have seen the Japanese version a zillion times. It's just, the omissions and the changes, I wouldn't call them awful or ear splitting. They don't ruin the movie for me, but they diminish it. And that's just kind of how I feel about it. Anyway, our next discussion will be headed back to the realm of Pokemon side games. And our next discussion, we're going to be discussing the music of Pokemon Puzzle League for the N64. So for those of you who aren't aware, Puzzle League, which interestingly has stuck around as the name of the series, although I don't think we've seen an entry for a while, but it would become the name of the series in the West going forward, is a puzzle game, of course, and it's based on a Japanese game called Panel de Pon, and which originally was localized to the West as Tetris Attack and featured Yoshi's Island characters. And then they keep remaking this game using the Pokemon themed version. There's also a separate game for the game with totally different music. But most of the stuff in Pokemon Puzzle League for the N64 is derived either from To Be a Master or Pokemon the First Movie. So we won't be escaping quite so easily if discussing the music of this movie with our next discussion. But if you want to play that, it was on the original Wii Virtual Console. I don't think it was brought over, but a cartridge shouldn't be too hard to find. But Anne, are you looking forward to discussing the music of that?
I've never played this game, actually. So yes, there will be new experiences for me on many fronts.
Well, I think I'll find it. I've definitely played a fair amount of it over the years. It'll be interesting to sort of revisit that and its music, which I think has some pluses and minuses. They did some interesting things and some things that maybe didn't work out so great there, but we'll see what happens with all of that. But until then, Anne, thank you very much for being on.
Thank you.
This has been Stephen Reich. All right, folks, thanks. All right, and then we're going to do a discussion of the movie itself, and we
have like 10 minutes to get all the thoughts.
Okay, I think what we might be better off doing here is actually leaving this for a time later this week or something like that to do like a half hour, leave a half hour for that. So apologies to the folks here who really wanted to discuss the movie, but we've already spent almost an hour and 45 minutes just talking about the music, and this is going to be real fun to clean up and edit. So I will let Anne get on to her stuff in a little bit. And I think we'll reschedule our actual movie discussion for a short time period sometime in the future. But I will try today to get the next episode of my podcast will be our Snap discussion out on the podcast feed. And eventually we'll sometime later this week talk about, or maybe, like I said, you just give me some time slots to work with Anne and I'll schedule something to talk about the stuff here. But thank you to everyone who showed up. And if, like I say, if you're watching this on replay, thank you very much. And give us any comments you have about the music of this movie. Like I said, we'll talk about whether we would want to see additional movies redone in this style, keeping in mind some of the musical choices and whatnot. But we'll do that kind of at some other time. But until then, all right, thanks, everybody. I'm going to have to kind of close things up right about now. But thank you very much for coming in here. All right.